Since the launch of Poppy Playtime's Chapter 4, there have been numerous bits of early concept art and animations that have been shared by some of the development team, and these reveal several changes compared to what we saw in the final version, as well as they give us a cool glimpse into an earlier stage of this chapter's development, and we'll be checking out a bunch of those today. And before we get to that, a quick shout out to myself. If you're enjoying the videos and would like to help support the channel with some cool gear, check out some of my merch. We got some cool shirts and hoodies, stickers, as well as a poster celebrating the last decade of my videos. Link is down in the description if you'd like to check some out. And with all of that said, blast that like button below. It's time for the fourth and probably final Lost Bits video on this chapter. Let's check out some more Poppy Playtime Chapter 4 Lost Bits. Alright, so let's kick things off with chatting about some early artwork that was shared by several artists who worked on this chapter. First up, we have several concept sketches for the game's environments, made by Benjamin Yim, and these include some concept sketches of various areas, including this small room containing a power puzzle, as well as VHS tape right beside the VCR, and this might have been a concept sketch for the room near the train yard that takes you to the prison's interior. And then also related to the train station, we have this document sharing 3 different styles of train platforms with different materials used on the platform and rails, as well as different light posts, and we can see 2 images for the bottom 2 that were presumably used as references. And then to top it all off for the train stuff, there's this document showing 9 different color combinations for the front of the train. Now, normally it's really hard to tell what the colors are of the train in the final version of this chapter with the low lighting here, and I'll let you guess which one of these color combos was chosen. Alright, got your answer locked in? Well, whatever you chose, you're actually wrong, as none of these were chosen, as the train is mostly red in the game with a yellow top on the back and yellow headlight things, although it looks like the actual lights never ended up getting added into the game. Next up, we have the room that you fall down into the pit with Pianosaurus in this chapter, and I think this artwork looks awesome, but then we also have a trio of early sketches for this area too, where in these notes we can actually see that the design of this area was heavily inspired by both a zoo and actually the movie Jurassic World, as 2 reference images here with their notes show that the ledge the player falls down from, as well as some planned vegetation that didn't end up getting implemented, were both inspired from the raptor domain from that movie. Then next up, there's this concept art of one of the security control rooms from the prison, and although it looks pretty similar to how they're seen in the final game, albeit with a different control console here, one thing I found interesting in this artwork is in the back of the room we can see what looks like a train map as well as photos of several toys, I guess indicating where they were being held or something. And here, we of course got some familiar faces like Huggy, PJ Pugapillar, Daisy, as well as a few of the smiling critters. But then we also got a pair of other creatures here that I don't recognize at all. Not sure if these are characters from something else, or maybe placeholder early versions of Doey and Yarnaby or something, but if you recognize these, be sure to let us know down in the comments below. Then after this, we have this bit of concept art of the prison's main hub area that, although similar to how it's seen in the final version of this chapter, some differences here include the colors being in a different order, both on the lines on the floor as well as on the square prison logo up here. There's no fencing surrounding the central desk, and then the back of this room is directly labeled as an office on the door here, instead of on the floor, leading up to the wardens and other offices there. Next, we have several concept sketches of the square and circular resistors that you replace in the Safe Haven's generator with various different connector design ideas. And then we also have this more finalized design for the circular one, and interestingly, in both of these we got some concept artception, as in their top lefts, we can see some concept art for the generator itself, and then even deeper, there's what looks to actually be a screenshot from an early test map of some sort, with an also early model of the generator that somebody whipped up. And although it's pretty blurry here, since this is such a small part of this document, we can see the devs even labeling what the various components of the generator here are. Next, we got some art of the prison yard, where aside from the tower numbers and which one is obscured, it looks pretty close to how it's seen in the final version of this area. But one thing that caught my eye was the one chain here being found under this minecart. Now, if you watched my previous videos, you may recall that one of the dev notes indicated that the original plan was for one of the chains to be under a minecart, which the player would have to move off of it, and this didn't end up being the case in the final game, but it looks like this sketch was made with that idea in mind. Then we also have this document in which we can see some earlier art for this area, but in these two bottom images, the cart is still seen covering the chain here. So I guess there might have been some explicit instructions given to make sure that this was included in the sketches. And then, as you saw earlier, this document also has several different design concepts for the yard towers here in different shapes and styles too. Next, we have some art for the Doctor's Domain area, first of which are actually a surprising number of concept sketches for the buzzsaw machine seen in the morgue room. We got several different sketches, including different designs for the arm, as well as different ideas for how it would move, including different wheel configurations, as well as a pair of sketches with the machine on rails. And then there's also this document with a more finalized design, both with a movable cart as well as without one. Then after this, we have several different concept designs for the gas mask filter dispensing machine. The general idea is the same with the big red button, but there are also various ideas here for how the filters would be dispensed and if there would be a display on the machine or not. And then in this document with the more finalized design, interestingly, despite the final canisters only having a yellow stripe on an otherwise black cylinder, here we have seemingly early ideas for them appearing in red, yellow, and/or blue. Now, based on its model, it seems like the gas mask normally takes yellow filters, but it's interesting to me to see these other colors here, and I wonder if there were any sort of plans for them to offer a different amount of oxygen to the player or something. Then after this, my favorite concept sketches for this part of the game are for the Doctor's headquarters, and first, we have this panopticon-like observation area that looks like it would have been suspended from the ceiling with lights, speakers, and other things underneath it, and based on this human figure here being used as a size reference for these ducts, it seems like those are perhaps how the player would have entered and left this building. Now, I guess we did get something sort of similar in the final version of this chapter, as there's some windows under the elevator that takes you up to the Doctor, but it's definitely not as cool looking or fleshed out as this is. And I think it's a shame, because I think this looks awesome, and this would have been really cool to see above leading up to the Doctor, as well as during the final fight against Dowie. And how do I know that that's where this was going to be, you might be wondering? Well, we actually have another set of concept sketches here, where one of them actually shows that this observation/central light source was in fact conceptualized to be there in the middle of the area. Then the rest of this sheet shows off various different ideas for the Doctor's headquarters, including different configurations of screens and their designs. Two of the concepts here had a bunch of toys hanging from the ceiling, and then several of these would have leaned more into the HQ being in a cave-like setting compared to the more developed design that we ended up seeing. And then of course, there are different ideas here for how the Doctor himself would be seen. Rather than just a central unit with his brain, other ideas here include the Doctor being hooked up to the central computer in one of the TV-headed robots, either just standing, seemingly at the controls of some sort of console, or my favorite, sitting on a throne. And honestly, I think pulling up to the Doctor sitting on a throne like this would have been super badass to see in this chapter. And now lastly here, for the environment concept sketches, we got some for the crusher grinder thing that's used to finally defeat Dowie towards the end of this chapter, where here we can see a different design of the machine with fewer canisters of liquid nitrogen. And then much like some of the other objects earlier, here too we have various different design ideas for this grinder as well. Now before we go on, not found in any of the concept sketches I saw, but rather in a picture of the Poppy Playtime pop-up store that opened up in Japan, on this backdrop of the prison entrance here, I actually noticed a small difference that isn't seen in the game. And this is the text above the entrance door. The Shelf, seemingly a code name for the prison or something. Now, I couldn't find any other references to the shelf in the game, but I just find this incredibly odd that it's seen here in this promotional shot of this entrance. Though I do think a nickname like this for the prison would have been a cool idea. Now, next up for this video, let's move on to some concept art for the characters, first of which are several for the Doctor himself drawn up by Robert Coe. Now, for starters, gonna speculate here, but overall it seems like the original idea for the Doctor was not for there to be numerous robots that he'd take control of in his headquarters, as is seen in this chapter, but rather he'd just be one robot that you'd encounter, or at the very least he'd be a special main one with some blue garment under his outer lab coat cloak. And why do I think this? Well, a few reasons actually. Namely, there's this sheet with sketches of the Doctor leaning over and killing a critter, an idea of him towering over and looking down at the protagonist, an uncloaked version of the robot that reveals what looks to be the Doctor's heart encased inside the robot, and then, what convinces me the most is we have this sheet featuring several reaction screens for the Doctor's TV, most of which didn't make it into the final cut. And the subtext for these seems like there was once planned to actually be a battle against one Doctor robot, rather than just evading many of them. Now, this is of course not 100% confirmed and all just my speculation, but this one especially makes me think that the originally planned encounter with the Doctor was once much different than how we end up seeing it. And some of these screens are pretty wild. I think only the top row and the yellow pulled apart eye is seen in the game, but yeah, these other ones look super cool and I think it's too bad that they didn't end up getting used. Now, overall, I found the Doctor encounter pretty underwhelming in this chapter personally, especially with how much he was gassed up in the trailers leading up to release, so I think it's interesting to see that plans for his role in this chapter may have once been a bit different. Then after this, we have some more bits of character concept art, this time from Amber Ogden. First of which is the concept sketch for none other than Limon, which was super cool to see. And here we also got photos of some eyepieces and what looks to be a real photo of a lemon peel that were used as a reference. Next, there's this sheet of concept art of Yarnaby doing Yarnaby things. The sketches here all look fairly similar to his final design, maybe just a bit skinnier here, but as a fellow cat enjoyer, my favorite of these has to be this sketch of Yarnaby being held with him just ragdolling like a cat. And then finally for the character sketches here, we also have some for Dowie. And although his appearance looks similar again here, interestingly, none of these sketches depict Dowie as a nice guy at all. And instead, they're all of him in an antagonistic vibe, with him even saying some very mean things. These sketches here range from pretty goofy to nightmare fuel, with Dowie ripping his face off, having an incredibly creepy face, as well as having several arms emerging from his mouth, similar to what we do see in his final monster design in this chapter. But my favorite of the sketches here though has to be this one in a scrapped idea where Dowie would like flex his arm, and then dough models of the antagonists of the game's 3 prior chapters, Huggy Wuggy, Mommy Longlegs, and Catnap, would form. And I just think this would have been really cool to see in this chapter. Now, based on all of these sketches, especially this one, it looks like Dowie may not have undergone as big of a transformation to a different design as we see in the final version of this chapter, and instead, he would have mostly retained his regular look, but just would have cranked his meanness level to 11. And this idea is actually also exemplified in this other bit of concept art for an idea where Dowie would have pulled up and confronted both the player as well as Kissy Missy. And again, although seemingly already going full send with opposing the player, overall, he still retains his normal look. And despite how creepy the monster Dowie is in the game, something about him still looking happy like this while trying to kill the player would be very unsettling too. And interestingly, Amber also shared the process of how this art was made from its original rough sketch to a rough grayscale all the way to the final version, and I think this was super cool to see. And lastly, for the sketches, for this video at least, similar to the ones we covered back in Chapter 2, there are actually several storyboard sketches that were shared by their artist, Scott Forrester, which give us an early look at how certain scenes were planned to be animated for this chapter. Starting in the top left of this video here, featuring 4 scenes, we have an early look at Pianosaurus's short appearance in this chapter and how he gets attacked by Doey. And yeah, here it seems to play out exactly the same as it does in the final version of this chapter. Then next, we have Doey's transformation here, and although only slightly different to how it's seen in the game, the subtitles here seem to show some different lines for Doey's monologue that aren't used in the final cut. Then we have Yarnaby in his observation room here, where after jumping towards the player and attacking the glass for a bit, he then starts to wave or paw at the window, which I thought was pretty funny. Another interesting difference here is that this shows the doctor's eye on the TV in this room. Now this TV is still in this room in the final version of this area, so I guess the intention was to display his eye here, much like we see it in the train segment, but as I covered in my last video, it looks like the implementation of the doctor's TV videos wasn't exactly perfected, so that might be why the devs chose to just not use this TV here. And then last up for this first video, we have a storyboard for Yarnaby's death sequence, where it looks like originally, the idea was for Yarnaby to get tangled up in a bunch of hooks and chains, instead of just the one that we see in the final version of his demise. And here, we also don't see him catching fire or anything, so perhaps the original idea for his bamboozlement here didn't involve fire at all, and he would just go out like this. And speaking of Yarnaby catching fire, there's actually one more storyboard sequence that was shared, and it's of the protagonist straight up just blasting Yarnaby with the flare gun hand, which would cause him to combust into a pile of ash. Yeah. Now I'm not sure how seriously planned this storyboard was, as this seems like it would have been a way too easy way to defeat Yarnaby. And he just looks so non-threatening in the storyboard, like he just wants to play, which makes this kinda sad. And now, let's move on from the static concept art and get to talking about several early and unused animations that were shared by some of the other developers. First, for Poppy herself, animated by Malachi Breckenridge, we have an unused walking cycle where she'd hold up her dress a bit as she'd walk around. Now, when asked why this animation didn't end up getting used, apparently the rig for Poppy's model underwent significant adjustments, and as a result, this animation ended up being canned. Then also from Malachi, we have a video comparing animations for Pianosaurus's Munchin as well as the death scene. Now, the actual animations of Pianosaurus seem to be the same, but of course here, these animations are taking place in some sort of basic placeholder rooms, and we also don't have any of the final lighting effects either. Next for Doey, first we have a behind-the-scenes look at Doey's animation of him spaghetting through the bars here in a placeholder version of the cave area made by Taylor Lanning. And Taylor also shared an early animation of Doey's interaction with Poppy and the player just before you're tasked with repairing the generator. And in addition to seeing an untextured Doey here, we can also see an early, equally untextured safe haven towards the end of this clip, which I thought was awesome as it looks so incredibly basic. And then lastly from Taylor here, we also have this unused animation of Yarnaby stalking. And yeah, let's address the elephant in the room, he's yarn-less here. And I've seen many call him Baldaby or just Ubby, since there's no yarn. Now I can only assume that Yarnaby's yarn hair just wasn't fully developed at this point or something, but whatever the case may be, seeing Yarnaby like this is pretty epic, and don't you worry, we'll be seeing lots more of him like this. Like next, we have some early animation clips from Achebe Spencer, whose early content we've been seeing since all the way back in Chapter 1, I believe. And these include Baldaby's reveal with him jumping at the player in the observation room, a running animation, one of him both entering and exiting a vent, him patrolling the server room, and then my favorite of the bunch, there's this one of Yarnaby trying to reach the player after they escape into a vent. And yeah, all of these just look super cursed. Then Achebe also shared a behind-the-scenes look at the animations made for the Doughy commercial seen in the intro cutscene. And not only did I think it was really cool to see these animations in a basic placeholder area, but in the top left here we can also see the real-life recording's Doughy less. And other differences in this recording are this picture frame lacking any picture inside of it, and then in the next shots with the fridge and the toy train with the basketball, in both shots, we can see a stainless steel fridge instead of the white one that's seen in the final version of the cutscene. Now otherwise, these shots appear to be the exact same, so it looks like the devs actually added in like a fake white fridge in post-editing, as I guess perhaps the stainless steel one looks too modern for the 1992 time period that it seems this intro tape was taking place in. And although the text is quite hard to read since this video is so small, this seems to be confirmed, as the text here appears to read, "Fridge needs CG replacement for reflections and to be time period accurate." It certainly makes sense, but I don't know, I just thought it was interesting to see that they ended up swapping out the fridge like this. And also, there's this short animation of Doughy smiling and holding up a finger, which doesn't normally get seen as the commercial cuts to the kids gasping. And then my favorite thing in this clip is we can see a behind the scenes look at how this brief shot of Doughy popping up behind the kids was done, as we can see where the camera is placed here, aiming at the real life recording with Doughy offset further back. Honestly, really cool to see how they pulled this off. And then last but absolutely not least, we have numerous behind the scenes animation tests shared by Alex Sentel. What a profile picture. For Yarnaby, we got idle animations of him looking around and sniffing, as well as one of him doing a shake-stretch combo, as some cats like to do. Then there's hairless Yarnaby appearing in the first chase hallway, as well as an accompanying jump scare animation test. And then there's also this clip of Yarnaby's death animation, just lacking him catching fire here. Next, we got a bunch for the Doughman, including him glooping through the crack in the prison yard, him moving his extended head just after that section in this really basic hallway, his animation seen in the safe haven when he wants to talk to the player alone in the generator room, which here looks kinda weird since the face lip sync animations weren't added yet. And then there's also an animation sequence that ended up getting cut from the game, and it's of Doughy peeking around a corner, but then getting blocked as the path gets caved in, after which he then looks towards us with suspicion. Now in the description of this video, Alex Sentel confirms that this animation was planned to be seen later in the game, as Doughy gets more and more suspicious of the protagonist. And based on the train tracks here, I think it's likely that this might have been planned for the cave section leading up to the foundation area that would have doubled as a fancy way to prevent the player from backtracking. But whatever the case may be, I really like this animation, and I think it would have been cool to see more hints of Doughy getting suspicious of the protagonist's actions and intentions as we progressed through the chapter. And then lastly, we have a test animation of the final scene in this chapter where we get an injured Huggy Wuggy running towards the protagonist after they get locked up in the room leading up to the laboratories. Now, Huggy's animation looks to be similar, if not the same, but what I thought was interesting is that his model actually appears a bit different here. As we saw in my first Lost Bits video on this chapter, getting a closer look at Huggy, we saw his injuries stuffed with some white gauze. And this model here doesn't seem to have that gauze, leaving his wounds appearing much more exposed and essentially just being held together with some rope. Now, I can't really say one looks more gory than the other, but still, interesting that it seemingly got changed in the first place. Now, I think it's awesome that the artists and animators shared all of this early work with us online, and it's really cool that they were allowed to do so. Not every company is as transparent with their early development processes. If any of the artists or devs end up watching this video, thank you for sharing. Your work is awesome. Anyways, my friends, over 20,000 words later, I think that's about it for Poppy Playtime Chapter 4 for this series, and I hope you enjoyed these videos. If you did, check out some of my other Lost Bits videos, and be sure to subscribe to the channel to find your way back here in the future as we now look towards Chapter 5. And as always, thank you all so much for popping by today, and I will see you in a bit.